Welcome to Alt D number 4, and today I'm really going to drop a bombshell because it looks like we may have just reached the turning point in Germany and the beginning of the end for Angela Merkel. I follow the Wissensmanufaktur, or the information fabric, and the commentary from Julian Reichelt, the editor-in-chief of the Bild newspaper, the leading tabloid and the newspaper that steers politics in Germany. For a little bit of background on this, we can take a look at the book I introduced the other day, Presstitutes Embedded in the Pay of the CIA. If we want to get a background on the Bild, if you're not familiar with it, he has two sections expressly about the Bild. But here's Build Your Own Opinion on page 86. Who still remembers Mao Zedong, communist leader of the People's Republic of China? If nothing else, that man loved his cult of personality. The Chinese media had to pay him constant homage. Had Chairman Mao been able to see Angela Merkel's 60th birthday, he would have been green with envy. Mao forced the media in his country to praise him under the threat of draconian punishment. Today, in the German media, this kind of praise seems to be fully automated. Everybody loves Mutti. Leading the vanguard in this modern cult of personality, the Bild newspaper. The Professor Brigitte Wilzer asserts that we live in a dictatorship of the dumb, in an idiocracy. Our society is getting dumber. Always way out front in this dumbing down, the Bild newspaper. Professor Wilzer has observed how our leading media also inform themselves with Bild. She writes, "Of course, there are differences between the Bild and other newspapers. Let's take our erstwhile quality media, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung or Süddeutsche Zeitung, for example. They put together highbrow information for a nationwide readership, but they also follow the Bild's lead when it comes to the agenda for public discourse. At least, this is what my personal experience tells me from the time I spent in a cafe in Berlin's Prenzlauer Berg. I was able to personally follow the newspaper reading habits of a well-known Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung editor there for 3 years. He with a copy of the Bild, I at a loss for words. This may be an exception, but I am surrounded by people who earn a living in the media, and honestly, I hear nothing else. This is why I would like to insist. The Bild sets the agenda. It is merely given a makeover by the Frankfurter and the Süddeutsche, intellectualized and fortified with science. This has taken reporting to a different level. But does it have a different objective?" So now that we have a little bit of an idea, Ulfkotte goes on to say, the Bild newspaper is Germany's highest circulation print newspaper. It has a paid daily circulation of about 2.4 million in 2014. The target audience of the Bild is neither the university professor nor the unskilled worker, but the average consumer. Overall, the Bild reaches about 18% of Germans, almost 1 in 5. 4.3 million women and 7.3 million men read the Bild every day for an average of 45 minutes. And when you take into account that this is then translated into all of the highbrow media in Germany in the next day, we are going to be seeing today and tomorrow a change in the entire media attitude in Germany, if this is anything near to the truth. And just a little bit more background, the Bild's recipe for success is simple. This is from page 92. Day after day, the newspaper squeezes all the facets of human life into just a few pages. This is all written in a narrative style that, like in a cheap novel, doesn't make any great demands on the reader. Love and hate, devotion and betrayal, happiness and despair, deadly diseases, crime and politics portrayed as power struggles and shutdowns. All this is presented in an emotionalized, personalized, simplified, and extremely confrontational way. For Bild readers, what's important isn't what's objectively important. Instead, anything that moves them emotionally is important. At most, the classic journalistic message in the Bild functions as an alibi. When it comes to reporting on boring political news, like a local political party's conference or a governmental report, they seek out emotional elements and personalize complex issues. By means of pseudo-revelations, the reader's attention is steered away from what's objectively important and diverted to what's trivial. In this way, the reader is diverted away from contemplating the real problems in politics and society. The Bild newspaper is like a mythical cornucopia. Every day, the whole world falls out of it, in easily digestible tidbits. On a day when Der Spiegel publishes matter-of-fact accounts of a military coup in Thailand, the Spanish king's resignation, and NATO war games against Russia, the Bild asks their readers in giant letters, who else has Angela Merkel's mobile phone number? And then, for their readers' future reference, the Bild goes on to list everyone who does have Merkel's number. And although Ulfkotte wrote this book when Kai Diekmann was the editor-in-chief of the Bild Zeitung, the new editor-in-chief, Julian Reichelt, would still be working for Friede Springer, the wife of the former publishing house owner, Axel Springer, who had passed away a while back. And to just finish this up, Diekmann appreciates Merkel, and Merkel appreciates Diekmann. With Diekmann at the helm, the Bild newspaper writes everything about Angela Merkel, just nothing negative. Now, you can imagine being Angela Merkel and having the Bild newspaper at your back since, 2006, 14 years? And now getting this headline in the commentary from the editor-in-chief, and the stubbornness in the corona politic. This is an incredible article, and let me just summarize this for you here quickly. First thing he does is he calls out the experts for getting nearly everything wrong. He calls out the Robert Koch Institute, which is basically like the CDC in Germany, and its dubious statistics, the contradictory dictates in the various German states where you can play tennis in one state and tennis is illegal in another state, and now this week in supermarkets and public transportation you have to wear masks after basically the numbers are down to almost zero for new infections. And what he says is, what worries me the most: our economy is already so badly and in some cases irreparably damaged that our government can hardly afford to admit that its measures were much too severe. The experts are now stuck in a situation where nobody can admit they're wrong, or would mean that they wrecked everything for nothing. Going on, he continues, Merkel won't tolerate any discussion, and the CDU is left making fun of the people who have been thinking outside the box. When it comes to protecting life at the expense of all else, this is a noble idea. But when you want to see how the state contradicts itself, you only have to look to the soldiers Merkel sent to die in Afghanistan. This is what the Germans would call pretty strong tobacco. And representing an absolutist ideology is anti-democratic. Reichelt goes as far as calling them crazy, in other words. Right here he closes the article by saying, and this is just a quick translation, I don't want to imagine how we will look back on these weeks and months in 3 or 4 years' time, when the average age of the dead will be higher than the average life expectancy, when millions of unemployed will be sitting on the streets, when the middle class, the ones who finance the welfare state, will be destroyed, when many restaurants are closed forever but the soup kitchens are open. The Chancellor should also think about that when she makes her next official statement. So if we scroll down and take a look at the other headlines that are playing in the Bild right now, how dependent is Germany on China? Laschet is speaking out against the virologists, and that's the people that the CDU were making fun of just recently. How complicated it is with the church services, another point of contention in Germany. The corona crisis is interrupting people's daily lives, something that they weren't necessarily reporting on in so much detail earlier. So let's take a look at the Wissensmanufaktur. I've been following them for a while. I've done some work for Rico Albrecht, Andreas Popp's partner, but here we've got Herman as well, who was a public television presenter for many years until she had a falling out and basically was hit with it. They call the Brown Club here in Germany. And what they're talking about, that was just published yesterday and already has 131,000 views, is that Popp continues to describe the Bild in the tones that we don't have a public opinion, we have a published opinion. Is this an about-face? Is Julian Reichelt, the editor-in-chief of the Bild, just an opportunist? Is he jumping on the conspiracy bandwagon? Did he become a conspiracy theorist himself all of a sudden? And this is something that I hadn't heard, but actually the Bild newspaper and Springer Publishing itself was taken over. And this, what we see just yesterday in the newspaper in Germany, is a 180-degree change in direction from what Popp describes as the China WHO Gates agenda. They had recently bashed Wolfgang Wodak, someone who's been very critical, an outspoken epidemiologist about the German government, and they raked him over the coals. So what's happened? Who is this new owner? Who took over the Bild newspaper? And why did this change of tone happen so quickly? What we have is a company called KKR, that is Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts, and that's an American consortium. It took over Springer Publishing early this year and also removed them from the German DAX. Popp explains the dynamics of the takeover, basically a surprise, hostile takeover that apparently ran a tune of 2.9 billion euros. Is KKR now pressing the interests of Trump in Germany, is the question. Popp goes on to say, when Bild decides that tomorrow Merkel and everybody else are gone, and also Steinmeier, then they're gone. Will they turn over the apple cart and expose everything as a lie, as the free media has already been reporting for a long time? Are they going to remake themselves as the vanguard of the investigative alternative media? So to introduce this next quote from Popp, I'd like to introduce you to Jens Spahn, the German Minister of Health, and Christian Drosten, the top virologist at Charité for public health in Germany. He says, I wouldn't be surprised if this leads to Merkel, Spahn, and Drosten, the public face of the crisis, being let off in handcuffs when we learn that they are together with Bill Gates, the WHO, and China, and with suspect financing. This is what amounts to a capital crime against the people of Germany. So, is this the beginning of the end for the establishment narrative? 131,000 Germans have already tuned in to Eva Herman and Andreas Popp and their commentary. At the end of the video, they get into the connections. At the bottom here, the headline is, what does the USA have to do with this? Trump recently had a tycoon's dinner, and Kravis of KKR was present. Popp asks, did Reichelt just commit career suicide, or did he get the green light to bring down Merkel? Spahn, and let's take another look at him with his husband right here, was acting megalomaniacal, but for the last week or two, he's appeared uncomfortable, alluding to the fact that mistakes may have been made, and he lets us know that Spahn's husband is a media bigwig at Burda. Perhaps he knows something from inside the media business. So once again, did the Bild just stick the first fork in Angela Merkel? And is the China, WHO, Bill Gates connection and all of the financing ties behind that coming to an end in Germany? If you want to watch the whole interview, I've got the link down below. You can turn on the English subtitles, but you gotta take what you get with automated subtitles. So enjoy the video. I'll be sure to introduce the Wissensmanufaktur to you in a later episode, but this could be the beginning of the end for Angela Merkel. We'll see how this develops in public opinion in Germany, because as we've seen from Udo Ulfkotte and others, former chancellors of Germany have said, all I need to rule is the Bild, BAMS, and that's the Bild on Sunday, and the boob tube.